We're back here on the Lunch Hour NFL Draft Show. I'm Joe DeLeon on the Believe channel. Noon every Tuesday and Thursday, we're talking with different experts across the Believe network to prepare you for the 2025 NFL Draft. Today, we've got on good friend of mine, Ryan Driscoll, former boss of mine for a brief period of time when I was working over at Irish Breakdown. Feels like very brief. It feels like it was forever ago when I was doing a little bit of recruiting coverage.
Quickly moved on to bigger and better things. Yeah,
I wish I stuck around. Ironically, the thing I moved on to was working as a producer for Believe, and here we are chatting about this Notre Dame draft class.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, I'm really excited though to talk about this team, and I think that the excitement comes from the level of talent that Marcus Freeman has put together with this roster. I feel like that this draft class is very different than many that we have seen from Notre Dame in the past few years. It doesn't have that premier Notre Dame lineman that we always talk about, but it's got guys who I think are going to go on to be really impactful starters. I want to open our discussion here just talking about how Marcus Freeman has had his completely different recruiting approach. He's recruiting a lot of guys that are sons of former NFL athletes. And overall, you're seeing just impactful players that have a high floor and also have very unheralded traits that end up making them important for their success this season, and then also could help them in the success that they have in their NFL careers.
What's interesting, and you look at the change in strategy since Marcus Freeman arrived, and it really goes back to when he arrived as the defensive coordinator in 2021, because you saw that class have a big impact on the season too, is a lot of times you can fall into one of two traps when you're evaluating talent, Joe. One is you can lean so heavily into tools that you ignore some of the, okay, yeah, but he can't read a defense, or he's not instinctive, or he doesn't know how to play. So he may run a 4-4, but he's not going to play like a 4-4. And then on the other side is you can lean so heavily into the intangibles that you're like, look, we were kind of joking about this before. This is the most instinctive safety I've ever seen, but he runs a 4.9. So it doesn't really matter. Those guys go to play for me at the Division III level. Great football players at that level because their speed tracks better at that level. And what Marcus Freeman has done is that, look, we're going to put a premium on length and athleticism and frame and upside, more so than is that guy ready to play right now. But we're also going to combine that with high football IQ guys. And so when you look at the Notre Dame corners and you ask yourself, they've had 2 freshman All-Americans at corner in the last 3 years. And if it wasn't for the presence of Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison at 23, Christian Gray probably would have been a freshman All-American as well.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't happen at Notre Dame. And it's like, well, what are they recruiting? Incredibly long, talented players, but really smart players as well. And we'll talk about that with Benjamin Morrison today. And that's why guys like Xavier Watts thrive so much, why Jack Kaiser thrives so much. And this class is a precursor, in my opinion, Joe, to what's coming down the road, where the classes are going to be even bigger and more athletic. And eventually we're going to get to the point where people stop being surprised at how athletic Notre Dame prospects are, which seems to even going all the way back to 2018 or the 2019 draft with Miles Boykin. And then 2020, you're like, wow, I didn't realize Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool were that fast. And I'm like, well, you need to watch more film, because they had no problem running by people their whole careers. So I think it's really putting a premium on those two attributes. And they've passed on some guys with great tools that drive the fan nuts. And you're like, but here's why. And then they've passed on some guys that are great high school football players and really smart players and great leaders, but just don't have the physical tools to thrive for a program that's trying to compete for championships. So, and you're starting to, as we saw this past season, and we'll see again in this draft and upcoming drafts, you're starting to see some of the fruits of that philosophy start to pay off with a team that's really long and really athletic.
Yeah, this draft class, I think, is like the first example of the tools that are being emphasized for Notre Dame. And big reason why they had success is that they had contributions from all of these upperclassmen: Xavier Watts, Riley Mills, Howard Cross, Jack Kaiser, across the board on that premier defense. I wanted to start off, though, talking about the guy who's the most likely to be selected first. It's a bit of a battle between, or not a battle, but a comparison between Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison. Morrison's draft stock has been really interesting to track, because at the beginning of the season, a lot of people recognized, hey, this guy is a really fluid coverage player. He was amazing as a young guy, getting early contributions. He was taking the ball away, making big, impactful plays at the catch point. He strapped up Marvin Harrison Jr., which was his claim to fame for how good he looked in coverage on him. But I feel like he's being a little bit forgotten about. And the reason why is a bit obvious. He's banged up. He's got a thin frame, and the injuries that he suffered end up being ones that are going to hold back and cause concern in the eyes of NFL scouts. How is Benjamin Morrison's impact? How does it show up on film, and what can NFL fans expect from him?
Well, the first thing you talk about with Benjamin is you talk to anyone around Notre Dame, they say he set the bar for how you work. He set the bar for how you study film, how you go through a practice every day. He was a professional from the minute he stepped on campus, which shouldn't surprise you. His dad was an NFL football player and helped kind of groom him to understand, like, hey, son, this is, you want to achieve these goals for yourself. This is how you kind of got to go about your business every day. And he's been a great role model for the younger players who were able to look up to him as far as just how he works every day. He's an incredibly high football IQ guy. He was never an elite athlete, but I think at times his athleticism gets sort of knocked for things I don't think it should get knocked for. But he's never a guy that if he was healthy, he wasn't going to go to the combine and run like, oh, wow, Benjamin Morrison ran a 4.35. He was going to probably be somewhere in the 4.4s, but he's very smooth, very fluid. His change of direction is easy. He's an easy mover, and it's something I look for in a corner. It's like, yeah, you could be really athletic, but if it takes you kind of an extra second and a half to kind of get in and out of a break, give me the guy that's a half of a tenth slower, or 100 slower, 10 slower, that can just quickly plant, redirect, change direction. That's the guy that I want on my team. And then he's long, and he's just got a great feel for the position. He's still a guy that I felt needed to get stronger. He's a guy that you're just bringing in to be a cover guy. He's never been really a big force against the run. He's a guy you're going to go out there and say, go cover that guy. You know, whether it's outside, whether it's in the slot. I do think he has some nickel potential, you know, obviously as he continues to get bigger, but you know, he's just one of those guys that, Joe, that is a really quality athlete, but an elite football guy. He reminds me a lot of Julian Love, but taller, longer, and faster. You know, Julian Love's a guy that didn't test well, but he was an elite football player in college, and he's turned out to be a pretty darn good football player in the NFL because what he lacks in elite tools physically, he makes up for with just toughness, intelligence, and just knowing where to be. I think Benjamin's like that as a corner, but he's got a better athletic profile than what Julian had.
I do think, though, and I think that you perfectly summed him up. You can see the instincts, you can see the intelligence, you see all that stuff on film when you watch him, and he's got the athleticism to back it up. But the thing that we have to acknowledge, though, is very thin cornerback. He's on the lighter side. It impacted his ability to tackle at times. And I think it's not, I'm no doctor, but it is seemingly correlative that he was banged up over the past couple of seasons, hip, shoulder. I feel like there should be a little bit of worry with him being able to stay healthy, just because if you don't have a big frame and you're starting to show injury concerns, that usually means that you're going to have those same injury concerns throughout your NFL career unless you start to bulk up more and more. Do you think that that's a real concern, knowing his lack of consistent availability at Notre Dame?
Certainly. I mean, the only game he missed he didn't miss any games as a freshman. The only game he missed as a sophomore was a hamstring. Now, he had some little bumps and bruises, but he did answer the bell with the exception of the Pitt game in 2023, which we were told before the game he could have played if you needed him. But, I mean, they beat Pitt 58-7. They didn't need him that game. But I think the injury that concerns me more, Joe, is like the hip, right? Obviously is a major red flag for me if I was an NFL team. I just want to know if it's going to heal. Hips don't always come back. You know, we've seen that before where guys have hip injuries and they're just not the same athlete. If I knew that was going to be totally fine, totally healthy, the shoulder concerns me a little bit more because that's more of the product of, okay, do you have the frame to hold up at this level? Do you have the frame to hold up? Yes, you went against Marvin Harrison. He was 18, 19 years old. You did great against him, but how are you going to handle DK Metcalf at 27? You know, I mean, those type of players. And that's a legitimate concern. And I think that's the thing that always made him a bit of a question mark for being a first rounder, like everybody was projecting him after his sophomore year and kind of coming into this year is. And then also that functional strength as far as winning contested catches. He was a guy that needed to be in great position. And like even Marvin Harrison beat him for a deep ball in 2023, but Benjamin was able to win off the line in a point where when Marvin went up for the ball, Benjamin was able to push him out of bounds. But he's not a guy that's going to be able to battle at the catch point consistently against some of those bigger receivers until he gets stronger. And that's why I say the shoulder would be a little bit more of a red flag for me than the hip if I knew the hip was going to be healthy. I think the hip is probably the more concerning thing for his draft stock because of just the uncertainty of that. And then, of course, it keeps him from testing and showing off some of those athletic traits that I believe that he has.
His running mate in the secondary, Xavier Watts, has been super productive over the last couple of years. It was always so exciting watching games, and then out of nowhere, you see Xavier Watts fly onto the screen. He'll get an interception. The pick six return that he had against USC was one of the best plays all season for Notre Dame. I think that, though, there's still a question of like, hey, is this guy athletic enough to be a premier starting safety, or is he mostly instincts? Is he going to be somebody who eventually falls into a rotational role because he can't be on the field all of the time? You and I were talking about this before we started here, that his pro day numbers were surprisingly better than many expected. What would you say to anybody who still might bring up like, hey, his athleticism does not excite me on film?
I just think the results speak for themselves, Joe, if you really look at it. I mean, look at who he's gone up against in recent years. And I don't know that I would ever say a lack of athleticism has been the thing holding him back. I think there's some things about his game that need to get better. He's another guy that's not a strong tackler. It is interesting as you watch the older players compared to some of the younger players in Notre Dame. A lot of the younger players are really strong tacklers. A lot of the older ones are not. Well, what was Xavier Watts brought to Notre Dame to do? He was brought to Notre Dame to play wide receiver. But just like the athleticism, the instincts, the feel for the game allowed him to come thrive. And so this past season, I think he especially improved as far as being in position to be a sound tackler, but he was never a strong tackler. But athleticism is like if you're a 4.55 and you know exactly where to be and you know how to be there because you've got that football IQ, you're going to play, quote unquote, faster than a 4.55. If you're a 4.4 guy and you're not instinctive, you have tight hips, your change of direction's not great, but you can run really fast in a straight line, but you struggle to pick up, play action and motions and post snap movement, things like that, then you're not going to play like a 4.4. And the thing about Xavier is you're getting every ounce of athleticism he has because he's one of the smartest safeties Notre Dame's ever had. And I think the second year of production and the second year of film was huge for him because now all the opponents had a read on him. But now he also had a second year of elite production where you can't just say fluky year. We had a couple games where he, piled up a lot of picks, things like that. Say, well, this guy was even better football player this year than he was last year. And he also was a guy that stepped up in the biggest moments. And I think that's something that matters to me. Do you want to win? Find a guy that's a clutch guy. I don't care about production as much. When did you make that production? And it seems like almost every time he was making a play, it was in some clutch moment in some big game. I think that matters too. But I think his athleticism is good. I think people sometimes confuse speed with athleticism. Some guys are very athletic, but not burners. Some guys are fast, but not overly athletic. And when it comes to the other things, and I think that's a mistake that I think people make. But look, underdraft Xavier Watts at your own peril. Kind of like we saw when Julian Love fell to the fourth round. He's been a Pro Bowler now, and some teams could have used a guy like him. And I think Xavier Watts is an even better football player and a better all-around athlete than even Julian Love was. And he's, I think, about 2 inches taller. So he's an outstanding football player and I think a much better athlete than some people give him credit for.
I think the most interesting part that you just brought up there, when you watch his film, there are a lot of players in college football that will, in the history of the sport, that will have really big interception totals. And then, you go look at the context and it's, they piled up in a couple of games, in specific games against a bad quarterback. There were opportunities where the ball might have bounced their way. They just ended up being lucky. Turnovers are always one of the most mischaracterized things in football, I believe, because there is a such thing as turnover luck, and there's a such thing as IQ of creating turnovers and knowing how to position yourself and making the right read and knowing how to make those plays. And Xavier Watts fits that description. Like, that's exactly what you're going to get with Xavier Watts. And I think that it's so simple and easy. The Bengals need safety help. They need good safeties. Al Golden is now the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. If he ends up a Bengal, I wouldn't be shocked. And I think that should be the push for Bengals fans, that they should want Xavier Watts.
Yeah, I think of all the defensive players that Al Golden coached at Notre Dame, that one makes the most sense for that fit. If there's a need at the safety position, because Al Golden's defense asks a lot of the safeties. And that's the other thing that I think people need to think about when it comes to Xavier Watts. He played in a very complex NFL style. It's not an NFL defense because you're never going to have as much in your playbook in the NFL and college as you do in the NFL for a million reasons. But he ran a very complex system, was asked to do a lot, and was also the primary communicator on the back end. So have someone who would come in right away and is going to know the defense, pick up the defense, and he can play and he can cover. I mean, this is still, with all due respect to the Ravens, for the most part, this is still a passing league. And this is a kid who can flat out cover and impact the pass game at a very high level. And the fact that he did it for 2 years is, says a lot. I love your comment though about stats, because I've had this debate about Ian Book. Well, Ian Book threw for 34 touchdowns in 19. And I'm like, yeah, 19 of them were against New Mexico, Bowling Green, Boston College, Duke, and Navy. You know what I mean? It's like, how many do you have against Michigan and Georgia? Or, know, and it's just, you got to look at, okay, yeah, stats are great, but stats can lie. And sometimes production can be hollow. When you look at Xavier Watts, that's not the case, because his production was clutch, and it was clutch over and over and over. And it was rare that he had a bad game, in a big moment. But you also saw some of the things, like in the Penn State game a little bit. You saw some of the things that are going to be a little bit of an issue for him when he gets matched up in space against Tyler Warren. He's going to struggle a little bit. Well, you know who else is going to struggle against Tyler Warren? Most safeties in the NFL.
Everybody.
Because he's because he's a freak size-wise. But he was still there. He still made the tackles and still made the plays, and he's an outstanding football player.
I remember 2 years ago when Riley Leonard was projected by Mel Kiper as a potential first-round quarterback when he was coming out of Duke. And I really hoped that Riley Leonard coming to Notre Dame, that he was going to help Notre Dame take that next step. And in many ways he did, but he also had a lot of frustrating moments, especially in the Northern Illinois game. He also had a lot of quality performances as a runner that helped propel them forward. And it felt like when Mike Denbrock made that realization of allowing him to play to his strengths was how they were going to succeed. But now we're talking in this draft scope of where does he fit in a not historically, but a bad quarterback class where there really are not a lot of good options. There are not a lot of developmental, hey, this guy on day 3 is going to turn into a starter. It's a couple of good guys, and then we're really throwing darts here. Do you think that Riley Leonard has a realistic shot of sticking on an NFL roster, or maybe even being more successful than that? Or do you think what we saw at Notre Dame is kind of reflective of who he is as a player?
I think what led some people to thinking Riley Leonard was a potential first round pick, I believe that's still there. I think when you go back and look at the kid he was in 2023, there was a lot more throwing game potential than what we saw the last 2 years, especially in the right system. And here's the deal. He's one of those guys that's got to go to the right place. If you're a team that loves throwing the vertical game, he's not your guy. It's not that he doesn't have a good arm. It's just he's not a good deep ball thrower. We've seen that throughout his career at Notre Dame. We saw that at Duke. He can hit the deep ball, but it's not something he's going to hit regularly. He's a guy that has a nice clean release. He can throw. He can kind of change arm angles. He's a guy that in my opinion has quality ability to read a defense. It's not great. That's another thing that I think limits him a little bit. But in a system where you're going to be 20 yards and in, Riley's he's a good quarterback. How much better he can be is going to be determined by whether or not you feel as an NFL team he has the ability to maybe take a jump when it comes to his ability to kind of absorb information and then process in a way that allows him to play at a higher level in the throwing game. I think that's what hurt him at Notre Dame. And, we could point to all the reasons why. He was hurt during the spring. He missed half of his the 2024-3 season and didn't get to connect with the players. They had a lot of drops for him at Notre Dame. There's all these things why, but there's also a lot of things where you're like, go break down the first quarter of the Ohio State game and you're like, he should have completed 5 other passes where he just missed. And I think that inconsistency when it comes to his footwork and his release point would get a little bit out of whack at times, because I think, like you said, Mike Denbrock just said, listen, I got this kid for 1 year and this is what he's good at. And when you look at what that offense looked like coming out of that first bye compared to what it was the first 5 games of the year, it's a different animal. But look, Joe, in a bad quarterback class, give me the winner. Give me the guy that was part of the team that won 3 games at Duke in the year before, 10 games. They won 10 games the 3 years before Riley Leonard took over starting quarterback. And he went, 13-5 in his 2 years as a starter there, and then comes to Notre Dame and leads them to the national title game. That's not an accident. He's either the luckiest quarterback on the planet, or this is what you're getting in Riley Leonard. And if it's a bad quarterback class, give me the winner, give me the high character guy, the team guy, and give me a guy that can be a playmaker. Because that, more than anything, that's what I want in a backup quarterback. I want a guy that can kind of come in and be a playmaker and do some things maybe off structure to bring him in. I'd much rather take a chance on a guy like that in a bad quarterback class than some of these guys who you're hoping, can run your offense a certain way. But if they can't, then you're in trouble because they don't bring a whole lot of other value to the table. And I agree, it's not a very good quarterback class.
No, there's not very many good options, and I support anybody who does push Riley Leonard as a good day 3 option, because at least he checks all those boxes that you're talking about, that, the old school approach of, hey, we want a guy who's a winner, who's over a certain physical profile, and he is a very good athlete. I don't know if he ever gets an opportunity to actually start a football game, but you would think for his intelligence, for his gamer mentality and ability to maybe step in if a starter got hurt, I'd take a shot on a guy like that as a backup for a long-term period of time. Before we get out of here, Brian, I want to ask you, there's a lot of other prospects in this class: Mitchell Evans, Jack Kaiser, Howard Cross, Riley Mills, maybe even a guy that I didn't mention in that grouping. If you had to pick one player who's not of the big names that we just discussed, that stuck around in the NFL for a very long time, who do you think that would be?
Riley Mills. I think Riley Mills is going to be that guy that somebody takes on day 3 because of the knee injury, knowing you're going to have to kind of stash him away early on. He became such a impactful football player. And I also think that Riley's best skill set is rushing the quarterback. And, 6'5", 300-pound guy with, pretty solid arm length, things along those lines that can get after the quarterback. I mean, he measured in at the pro day at 6'5", 296, 32 and 6'8", arm length, 10 and a quarter, or 10 and an eighth hands. He's not a super long guy. He's played some defensive end in his career. He could be like, maybe if you're a 3-4 team, he could do some of that. He just strikes me as that kind of guy that he's going to be a worker. He was a team captain, that he's going to be someone that gets picked on day 3 that ends up spending some time in the NFL just because he can bring some of that pass rushing value to the table. And then the other guy would be Jack Kaiser, is one of those 10-year NFL vets that's just a special teams captain. Not every guy gets, and this, and people don't know, why'd you draft that guy in the 5th round? He's not even that good, because you're not drafting him to play middle linebacker. You're drafting him to be, on part of your special teams. And if you need him to play, David Bruton for Notre Dame was a 10-year vet and all pro as a special teams guy, and then eventually got a chance to play safety later in his career. But the NFL still does that, and the good teams still do that. Jack Kaiser is one of those guys. There's a lot of those high character players like that I think stick. And, some of the other guys have some, Howard Cross's size and lack of production is a little bit concerning for me. And, and Mitchell Evans' lack of consistency and injury history is a big question mark for me. But he's a guy that I would take a flyer on, on late day 2 or day 3 if you have a need for a pass catching tight end. But some of those other guys just have that lack of consistency that concerns me. I think Jack Kaiser, what you're going to get every day. I think with Riley, he brings a skill set and a size that you covet in the National Football League.
Well, Brian, that's going to be it from us today. It was great getting to catch up with you and talk about these Notre Dame prospects. If you haven't done so already, Notre Dame fans, and you don't know what Irish Breakdown is, I implore you to get out from under the rock that you're living under. But obviously the best source for Notre Dame coverage out there. Be sure to go and check that out. Brian, anything else that you'd like to direct people to in order to check out the amazing work and coverage that you do?
Yeah, obviously, any YouTube. You can check us out on YouTube. If you go to Apple or Spotify, just type in Irish Breakdown to make it easy for you. Our premium message board, boards.irishbreakdown.com. Our website's irishbreakdown.com. I try to make it as easy as possible for you to find us. So just anywhere you consume content, just look up Irish Breakdown. And I think we have a lot of fun. We go live every day at 1 o'clock. So I'll be leaving you to go do our live show. We're going to be ranking the Notre Dame position groups today, pre-spring game. Where are they now? And then we'll look at it again after the spring. So it's going to be fun.
That's going to be a great discussion. Hopefully this Notre Dame team ends up taking a nice step forward during the spring. A lot of guys to replace that will be in this 2025 NFL draft. If you haven't done so already, also, folks, please hit subscribe on the Believe YouTube channel. We will be back on Thursday for another noon draft live show. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll talk to y'all later.